Hello and welcome to another episode of Drive With Me. Today I wanted to talk about developing purpose and figuring out priorities in your life. And this applies to really anyone at pretty much any stage in their life. It can be good to kind of take a moment, be introspective, take stock, as they say, and figure out and clarify what it is that we want for our lives as things change around us, right? And some of these will be core values and based in them, such as, like our families may be really important to us, our careers may be very important to us, owning a home may be super important, etc., right? There are certain core important things that each of us have, and determining what those are and then backing up mentally, kind of reverse engineering how we get there, generally speaking, to the best of our ability, is a process that I, as a therapist, work with clients on quite often. And so, where I often start is with what's known as the miracle question, right? So, I'll ask my clients, if you were to wake up tomorrow and your life was exactly the way you'd like it to be, what would it look like? Where would you live? What would you be doing with your time? Who would be in your life? What kind of family members or people would be living with you, etc., right? If anyone. What does that look like? What would your property look like? What would your bank account look like? And I'm sure for all of us, the answer for that one is almost always more money. But what kind of range are we looking at? What do you feel would allow you to feel comfortable and fulfilled and like you're living a meaningful existence? And then we kind of go backwards from there. So, given where life is now, how do we start working towards that? Then we start breaking down goals into what's known as SMART goals, right? Smart or specific, measurable, achievable, etc., right? And so it's an acronym that basically the idea behind it is to chunk these long-term goals into shorter term steps. And keeping them realistic is important for sure, but also you will never achieve what you don't aim for, right? You miss 100% of the shots not taken, as they say. So it's okay, and especially in this stage, to have goals that are somewhat lofty. However, it's also a good idea to make sure you're not emotionally dependent on those more lofty goals coming to pass, right? So, for example, if I was working with, say, like a teenager or something, and they're like, well, I really want to be like, start my own business to be a multimillionaire and retire by the age of 30. Like, okay, that's a cool goal set. That's awesome. That like fire, initiative, what's it called? Like, I forget exactly what it stands for. I forget what FI stands for, RE, and the FIRE acronym stands for retire early. That much I do remember. And I think it's financial independence. I think it's financial independence, retire early, something to that effect. Anyway, so like if I were to be working with a client that had that kind of goal set, then the question would be, okay, so what is it that we're looking for? How far into this goal are you? And where do you want to be, say, instead of measuring it by 30, where do you want to be within 2 years? What do we need to start doing now to start achieving that? Are you wanting to go to college, try to get a decent, paying job to then start putting into, saving for starting a business? Are you wanting to focus on making connections and building, developing mentorships? Or you wanting to intern, or like you wanting to get into a trade and start a business? That means, like, what is it that you're looking to do, right? And how do we want to get there? And then as we usually over the course of multiple sessions, and typically we don't even really broach this topic until we're a bit further into kind of a therapeutic relationship, if you will. The rapport has been built, kind of established what some of the immediate concerns are, started working through some of them, and now we're starting to talk about, okay, how does the immediate concerns that we had when we started our therapy sessions, how do we now translate this into a future and a tool set that you can develop so that you don't ever need therapy again, right? Or at the very least, you don't need it like this, to the best of your ability. Everybody goes through stuff. Everybody has things happen that are outside of their control. And I personally believe that everybody should have at least access to mental health services really at all times for when life happens, right? They have somebody to talk to, somebody to check in with, somebody to bounce ideas off of that isn't just their family or close friends that have inherent biases and so on, like an actual, like a professional, if you will, right? Not that any of us are perfect or perfectly professional at all times. We all have our biases, but nonetheless, I feel it would likely make the United States and the world as a whole a much better and more stable and emotionally mature place if we all had access to these services more regularly, and if we collectively took more advantage of them. And luckily, that's starting to come to pass over time. But back to goal setting, right? So after we've established where we want to be and what kind of timeline, and we've kind of reverse engineered it, now the arguably more challenging part is starting to put that some elements of a plan into effect. And here's the thing about reaching a goal, right? Like an ultimate goal, and sometimes even specific ones. We can have a general outline, a general plan, but life almost inevitably has a way of not working out the way we expect it to. Things change, things happen, certain opportunities that we really want don't open and other ones do. So the key to a lot of this is to remain adaptable and flexible and realize that it's the destination through the journey that matters. Ultimately, your goal is what matters. The specifics of how you get there, we need to stay flexible on, as long as we're keeping the ultimate goals in mind. So, and it doesn't have to be super, like, really intense or lofty ones either. It can be as simple as staying consistent because you want to be a good parent, and having a family was important to you. That was one of my goals, for example. I wanted a wife and children. That was important to me. And I now have that. And so it is important to me. My long-term goals are to raise my children ideally well, and I hope they have good childhoods. I hope they're healthy. I hope they have an enriching experience. I hope I'm able to guide them and provide them the skills and experiences that allow them to be successful in adulthood. And then do the same for their children and give them a good foundation to be able to continue the family, and our legacy collectively. And so that is one goal set that is important to me, and how I kind of got there was a process of very much figuring it out, what it is that I wanted to do and what was important in regards to where they lived, what kind of property did we have, what kind of childhood did I want to provide them, and then how do I get there financially. And then, okay, so obviously we're going to need money. Everybody needs money and resources to some degree. So how do we obtain those? What kind of fields are open? What kind of things would I be interested in, etc. And so there are some baseline things like work, for example, or how we obtain money is kind of a universal, right? Not everybody wants a family. Not everybody wants to get married. But pretty much everybody needs to live, right? And very few of us are born wealthy. So most of us are going to have to make that decision at some point, especially in this market that is increasingly, at least in the United States and much of the West, it is increasingly difficult to survive on low-wage jobs, where inflation is outpacing wages and has been for decades. What we choose is arguably more important than it has been in at least half a century or so. And so there's a lot of career counseling that goes into this too. That's actually a really common baseline. And so often goal setting, whether it be personal or not, often revolves around that. So if once we have that locked down, that's a large chunk of that particular problem. And so now, for example, I find myself in a position wherein I have my schooling, at least for now, done. I have no immediate plans of going back and may never go back to school. I already have quite enough student loan debt. Thank you very much. I have gotten married. I do have children. Hope to have at least one or two more. And actively working on building wealth and paying off debt. That's like the stage of life that I'm in right now, approaching what are often called your maximum earning years. And as I'm getting close to 40. And so it really does bring a lot of that into your immediate concerns and focuses into focus, and helps provide some clarity as to what direction you want to go in the future. So to those that may be younger and trying to figure this out, I would say be patient with yourselves. That's incredibly important. And don't be afraid to take some risks, because when you're young, that's when you can bounce back from them and pivot more easily. It gets harder the more commitments that you have and the more people you have reliant on you. It would be far more difficult. It's doable, but it's more difficult if I wanted to move careers now than if I had done so 10 years ago, for example. And I actually did do so 10 years ago. So I do not have any intention or desire of making that same kind of change now. In fact, I'm hoping to stay consistent, because that's the next component, is that once you find something, realize that there is an advantage to building wealth and getting consistent and working your way up an income ladder in a given job or field or company earlier, right? I know investors often talk about, the earlier you can start investing, the better. That's true to a point, because also the amount of money that you can put in tends to go up as you get older and you get more established and so on. So even if you find yourself in your 30s, 40s, 50s, and you don't have a 401k, don't have an investment portfolio, that's okay. There's plenty of people that catch up later in life also. It just takes more determination and more of your own taxable income to make that difference up that you would have had when you were younger. So if you're young, one of the biggest advantages you have is time. If you're older, one of the biggest advantages you have is experience and typically earning potential. So there's a trade-off. Just like with anything else, there's almost always a trade-off. And so I'm now in that position in life wherein I'm kind of at an almost ideal balance between youth and number of years that I should have left in a career or life in general, and experience. I have spent, almost 2 decades working in some form or fashion, and I've had, been out of college for a number of years, and so I have a decent amount of experience in my field, enough to kind of generally know what I'm doing, for example. Not that I'm an expert by any means, but also young enough that I can make movements if I want to, and in fact do eventually plan to. For example, I'm currently working as a therapist for a company, a nonprofit. However, I am very unlikely to stay here. And many that are older, I actually work with several that are older, they just want to retire and they just want to ride out the rest of their time, and I don't blame them. But that's one of the advantages of relative youth. Not that I'm particularly young, but I'm not even technically middle-aged yet. And so that does provide some advantages, or should over time, regarding being able to pivot. For example, if I want to open up my own practice and start working for myself. Other considerations definitely need to be made. If you want to be self-employed, you want to own a company, realize it is expensive. It is stressful. I've owned my own business. My wife and I did for about 4 years. It was in-home health care, primarily for the elderly, and it was stressful. The staffing and getting people's employees the hours that they needed, but also working around the needs and requirements, because we would go to people's homes. So trying to match all of that up was difficult. Managing training was an interesting task. So when you don't have a unified location where everybody is kind of together and where you can easily facilitate meetings and trainings and so on, creates a whole nother layer of challenge. And so my wife and I very much learned a lot of this the hard way. So All that said, realize that everything really truly does come with a trade-off, and almost nothing, if anything, is being sold to you as easy money or as as anything close to a get-rich-quick scheme or an easy way to earn this or an easy way to do that or flip this without using your own money, they're more than likely BSing you. And if they're not, they probably, like, more than likely, to really have access to truly easy money, you need to have it in the first place, or you need to have connections that help you get there. And often it involves exploiting other people. That's just the reality of it. So keep all of that in mind, that we should all be paid what we're worth for the work that we do. But the reality is in this market, we don't, because employers, the one of the big lies of capitalism in the modern United States is that workers are paid what they're worth. That's not true at all. They are paid as little as the employer can get away with paying, to pocket the difference as much as possible. Walmart is a particularly great example of, they use taxpayer funded programs such as food stamps and so on to effectively subsidize and pad the fact that they pay their people terribly, and their profits consistently go up quarter over quarter and year over year in most cases. So don't fall for that. Realize that you will need to fight for and push for being paid what you're actually worth, which means specializing is going to be a good idea. Getting into things like the trades may be a good idea. If you don't and you really want to go to college, you want to go like liberal arts or, social sciences major or what have you, like I did with psychology, realize it's going to be notably harder to get jobs and get good paying jobs. And you will often really only be eligible for the kind of jobs you could have gotten without them anyway. Unless there are some exceptions, if you go for like a master's degree or a doctoral degree, like I ended up doing to become a therapist, right? And even then, I wouldn't say the pay rate is particularly great, especially at the beginning, but it definitely has a lower floor and a higher ceiling than many careers will have. So all things to keep in mind. A lot of it depends on your ability, your interest, etc. But getting that financial foundation is going to be incredibly important, and kind of regardless of what it is that you're doing. And keeping a realistic, open-eyed kind of view of the world and the workforce and so on is going to be important as well. Don't think it would be painfully naive to believe that any of your employers are your friends, that they have your best interests, that they're looking out for you. They don't. Even if they're family friends, in the context of being your employer, it is going to be rare to almost impossible to find someone that is truly going to just pay you really well at what you're worth simply because they know you, or you're a family friend, or heck, even if you're family, right? One of the big rules of getting into business is don't get into business with close friends and family, because it will ruin those relationships. And as I've seen from experience, that can very much be the case. It's different if you're married, because then your finances are tied together. So you, or at least in, most people's cases they are. And so you both have the same goal, right? One earns money, or earning money for the family, right? That's not the case if, say, you're doing it with a sibling or with a parent or what have you. Then you often have competing interests, because there is something of a zero-sum game, that money from one means decreased money for another, right? So all things to consider. Be careful who it is that you trust, and keep your goals and expectations adaptable. And when you see opportunities, don't be afraid. Try not to be afraid to go after them. And don't be afraid to hurt other people's feelings. Doesn't matter unless there's a contract that says you have to stay at a job, doesn't matter whether or not they're family or you've been working there for a long time. If it's a better opportunity for you, take it. Because one of the most consistent and dependable ways of developing a higher income over time in the modern United States is to job hop. When you get a higher offer, take it, because your current employer will almost never pay you what you are currently worth. They will try to keep you more or less where they're at. Often employers, like current employers in general, this is just a human psychology thing, will tend to see an employee as like, well, they're even if they're more productive than they used to be, that's just because I took the time and training and investment in making them better. I don't feel like I owe them paying them more for this experience. They got paid more back when they weren't as experienced. And so really this is just a wash. I've literally heard employers say that to me, right? We're like, hey, yeah, but we took you on when you didn't really know what you were doing, and we paid you more than you were worth then, which I don't think is accurate anyway. But let's say, even if that's the case, okay, so how long is it until you feel I've paid off that supposed debt and now I'm worth more to you? And you never, at least in my experience, you almost never get a real answer. And so, more than likely, what you're going to have to do is move. Sometimes, and by that I mean move jobs, right? Sometimes move positions, like negotiate where you can. But the reality is the modern job market here is pretty inflexible on purpose. It's been built up to the point that it is very difficult to negotiate wages. And basically, what you get offered is what you get. And if you don't take it, somebody else will. And there are relatively few fields where that's not the case. And even where there are, you're still often or very rarely going to get paid anything close to the value that you bring to the company. In fact, that's actually kind of the deal, right? The goal is that if you're being brought in as an employee, you're producing more than you cost, because that is the whole point of bringing you on, right? So realize that by definition, as an employee, you are intended to create surplus value for your employer. That in and of itself is not inherently a problem, but realize that that is the deal going in, and that their goal is to maximize that surplus value that they're taking off the top from you. And your goal should be to maximize the value you keep. And eventually that may very well mean becoming self-employed, an independent business owner, etc. All of these things are to be kept in mind. However, money should not be the sole goal. Money is a means to achieve other things that you want, right? I mean, for those that, especially if you're young and money right now really is the primary thing and you're kind of figuring out the rest, that's fine. It doesn't mean you need to have some big lofty goal or a master plan, or in fact, often that can be more detrimental than helpful in the long run. So be patient with yourself. Try to have goals, but also stay adaptable, right? I think those would be the main takeaways that I have for you all here. And I am not extremely far into a career, but I'm far enough that I have witnessed many of these concepts being true. Having goals is important. Having expectations, having a realistic understanding of your value that you're bringing to a company is important. Trying to be willing to negotiate for that increased value is important. Really being willing to walk away. It's like that old song, right? You got to know when to hold them, know when to fold them, know when to walk away, know when to run, right? As they say. Similar concept in life generally, but I would say it's particularly impactful in the workplace. Sometimes it's good to just buckle down and be a good worker bee for a while, and that's okay. Build up that resume, build up that experience, get yourself through the process of understanding and knowing the ins and outs of your given industry, your job, your career field, etc. And then you can branch out. And though some people may be able to skip that if, say, they were raised. I have a client that I work with, and his dad was a landscaper. And so he grew up often working with him as a teenager and stuff, right? And so by the time he was an adult, he was just 18, 20, and he was out, had his own, career and his own business, basically took over and helped expand his dad's business. And he was running his own truck. He had his own tools. He was doing his whole own thing. And that was amazing. I'm like, good for you, man. So he didn't really have to spend a lot of time figuring out what he wanted to do, what he was planning on doing to make money. And then he kind of like slid right into getting married and having a child. And I think he's got two now while young. And actually haven't seen him in a while, but nonetheless, he was struggling because of some personal issues, but finances was not really his concern, right? And that is a good point to remember, that just because we have money does not mean we are happy. Because individuals that are actually fairly well off still come into therapy offices like mine and talk about all the issues that they have, because money is simply represents access to resources and lifestyle. That's it. It doesn't represent internal happiness or contentment or good relationships or anything else that really makes life fulfilling and meaningful. So those are all, it's a very multifaceted component, and there are very few simple answers in life. And if somebody is trying to sell you simple answers, they're probably lying, right? And if they're trying to sell you easy money, they're probably lying. If they're trying to sell you anything that involves using your money on a chance or on a gamble, think twice. Sometimes it's an investment in the future, sure, that is real, that's a thing, but you need to be very careful about what that is, because there's just as many con men and grifters, if not more, out there than actual good opportunities. In fact, honestly, probably way more than good opportunities there are con men and grifters and so on. So be careful. And I think that's pretty much all I had for today. So if you made it this far, thank you very much. Please feel free to like the video if you did. If you want to hear more about personal improvement, economics, current events, technology, etc., then please feel free to stick around, because we will be talking about it. All right, y'all. Have a good one.